Hi everyone, in this video we're going to put everything together and graph the following difficult function by first figuring out the amplitude, period, and the endpoints of a cycle. So first notice that since this is the graph of cosine, we know that a single cycle is going to look like this tulip shape. Since there's a minus in front, our cycles are actually going to be flipped upside down, so they'll look like upside down tulips. And we'll start at negative values instead of positive ones. So this is the shape of a cycle. And that's always our first step, figure out what the basic shape of our cycle is going to be. Now we'll figure out the amplitude of the graph. So remember, we get the amplitude by looking at the thing we multiply by. That's -3. But amplitude is the height of a wave, so we want to take the absolute value when we discuss the amplitude. The amplitude will just be 3. Next, we'll find the period. And remember that the period was related to the piece that we multiply x by. And so if we're speeding up our x values by 2 pi, then the amount of time it takes should be the amount of time to complete a usual cycle, which is 2 pi. Divided by how much we sped it up by, this b, which is 2 pi. So the period is just 1. So we should complete a cycle every single unit. So between every unit, we should have this blue shape. To get the left endpoint of our first cycle, we solve the equation where we take the stuff inside the parentheses and set it equals to 0. So I'll use a different color for that. So 2 pi x plus 4 pi equals 0 means that 2 pi x equals minus 4 pi. So x equals minus 4 pi divided by 2 pi, which is minus 2. So this is the x value for which our first cycle will start. Our first cycle will end when the stuff inside equals 2 pi. So I solve this equation, and I find that the cycle ends when x is -1. So between here and here, I will have a full cycle. I don't have a vertical or horizontal or vertical shift, so the middle of my graph is still going to be here. My amplitude is 3, so my graph has to fit in between 3 and -3. And my basic shape is like this. So at -2, I'll be at my lowest point. When I get to 1, I'll be back to my lowest point. Halfway between them, I'll be at my high point because that's halfway between the tulip shape. And at those quarter marks, that's when I'll have my x-intercept, my zeros. So we graph our single cycle, and we use that to graph the rest of the cycles. And it keeps on going. So not so bad when you have all of this information. The basic strategy is to first figure out the shape of the graph. Then you figure out all these values. I like to draw dotted lines that represent the start and end of a cycle. And I also draw dotted lines to represent the low point and the high point. And then I just fit everything together. So let's try another example. We want to sketch y equals 2 plus 3 cosine of 2x. So we'll do the same as before. The amplitude is 3, because that's the thing multiplying in front. The period is 2 pi over b, so it's 2 pi over 2, which is just pi. The left endpoint of a cycle, well, this one doesn't have a plus or a minus anything in parentheses, so the left endpoint is going to be 0. We can see that by using the same strategy as before. Just set 2x, what's inside of these parentheses, equal to 0. And that says x equals 0. The right endpoint of our first cycle is going to occur when the stuff inside the parentheses equals 2 pi. So in other words, when x equals pi. And again, we're looking at cosine. So the basic shape of our graph is a tulip. That's a single cycle. I've stretched it, but I haven't reflected it, so it's the right side up tulip, unlike in the last example. The only thing I'm missing here is that now I've done a vertical shift up by 2. So how is that going to affect our graph? Well, let's just try drawing it. Okay, so if this is 3 and this is -3, actually, I don't want to do, I want to make 3 here, -3 here. Let's make that 5 and -5. So here's 4, -2, -1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now my left endpoint of a cycle is going to be here when x is 0. My right endpoint is going to be at pi, so maybe let's make pi here, 2 pi here, -pi, -2 pi. So my first cycle should fit between here and here. Now, if I ignored this 2, then my graph would fit between 3 and -3. And it's cosine, so I start up high. At my halfway point, I have the low point of my cycle. At the quarter points, I go through 0. So this one is the graph of 3 cosine 2x. But I want to do 2 plus 3 cosine 2x. So I need to take this graph and shift it up by 2, which means my high point shifts up by 2, and my low point shifts up by 2. So instead, I'll be between -1 and 5 instead of being between -1 and 3. So the graph of the function I actually want is the same as this one, but shifted up. So my high point will be here. My low point will occur at the same place, but I have a y value of -1, and I'll still end here. And so looks like this, and like this. So notice that the amplitude is still the same. The height of a single wave, which is half the distance between the low point and the high point, is still 3, even though I've shifted up by 2. That doesn't change anything. It just changes where my graph is. It doesn't change the size of it. So that's how you deal with the vertical translations. And I guess between these two examples, you've seen everything you could possibly see. You've seen reflections, and you've seen vertical stretches. You've seen a change in period or a horizontal stretch. You've seen a horizontal translation, and you've seen a vertical translation. And we've used the amplitude, period, left and right endpoints in order to guide our graph, as well as knowing the basic shape of one cycle of cosine or sine. So come back to these videos as many times as you want for some help with this. It takes a lot of practice, but I have faith in you, and just be diligent. Good luck.